All right, hello, welcome to Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture, Solar Sunday. Wow, that was a tongue twister more than it should be usually. Um, my name is CB Robertson, aka News Store. This is Ed Haman, aka Tormenos, and we're here to just talk about stuff that's been going on, current events from a more solar perspective. It's going to be a kind of downturn, I think, in seriousness from massive international political intrigue and so forth. But just touching on some old subjects in sort of a modern new iteration, because these things always seem to cycle in and out, and it's fun seeing the Gen Z kids discover stuff that we kind of ran into years ago, but they give it their own name. So we'll be getting into performative males, and some interesting BJJ stories that have been in the news recently. Tarmanos, how have you been?
Cold, but solar.
Cold but solar. I wish it was colder out here in the Northwest. It's been like in the 40s, which is wild for early February. Usually it's like -5, and now it's like 35. I think the low was in the high 30s, which is crazy. Warm winter.
It's been a painful, icy situation for days and days and days with icy wind.
Yeah. Send some of it our way.
Sure. Hey, yeah, I will speak to the gods in charge.
Ian says, I want the sun back. It is nice to have the sun. What sucks is the warm but overcast, which is what we've been getting. So it's not a lot of crazy stuff going on exactly at the moment, but these two stories sort of intersected in an interesting way. I've been seeing this phrase performative male pop up, and if you Google it, the AI summary says this is a 2025 social media term. Apparently this has been going all over the place on TikTok. I'm not on TikTok, so I pick it all up secondhand. And the more I looked into it, the more this phrase seems to be like Gen Z discovering male feminists all over again. In fact, let me pull up the summary definition here. The AI overview says a performative male, or matcha male, that must be an Australian term, is a 2025 social media term for a man who insincerely adopts progressive, sensitive, or feminist-leaning behaviors to appear safe and attractive to women. It's often used in the mocking context. This archetype is seen as curating a soft aesthetic, including interests like iced coffee, tote bags, and indie music as performance.
It sounds pretty heterosexual also.
Yes. The beautiful ones from the like Rattopia experiments or whatever. But it's just the male feminist, or as the lovely Dr. Godsad would say, the sneaky fucker strategy, where you present yourself as the soft, understanding personality. And the reel on Instagram that caught my eye was this Australian guy who was complaining at great length about how, when I was a drug addict and cheating on people and ending up in jail, none of my guys called me performative for doing that. But it was only when I started to get like in touch with my inner feminine and started he grouped in reading books with that. It's like, okay, let's not group unlike things together here. But I started caring about what women want from men, basically. That people guys started calling me performative. And so there's like the general criticism of this archetype, this male feminist in the Gen Z edition. But there's also these interesting rhetorical pushbacks to it. And it, seeing this led me back down to, and anyone who's listening to this who is like Gen Z adjacent and for whom this phenomenon of the performative male is new, I would encourage you to go back and listen to the Jackson Katz TED Talk. This would have been from 2014, somewhere thereabouts, 2013, 2014, somewhere in there. which is like the textbook performative male performance. He's like he has the physiognomy and appearance of like one of these like former sports coaches turned leadership counselor with a progressive edge. He has all the physiognomy of someone who has things in their past that they're trying to compensate for as far as allegations. Not making an allegation there, but like there is a type, we can say, and which we'll get into further later with BJJ. But like if you listen to that TED talk, he's going through the motions of making arguments, but every step in his process is like either a non sequitur or a giant leap in reasoning. He like does this thing on a whiteboard where he just writes a bunch of variations of a sentence as if we are consciously doing this societally and acting as if he has proven something about how society treats men and women as victims or perpetrators or whatever. And like if you think about what he's saying in the microscopic level and contrast it with what he's doing at the macroscopic level, the whole thing is a contradiction. Like he goes on and on about how like we can't victim blaming. It's terrible to victim blame. Victim blaming is awful. People following the Scotty K Fitness thing will maybe see something here, but like he says victim blaming is terrible. Also, it is naive. He uses this way. It's very naive to do this. Calling something naive is not an argument, but he says it's very naive to act like this is the result of individual actions because most of these perpetrators are very normal people. Okay, maybe fair enough. So we have to think about it at a broad social level. And it's a problem of male violence, but also men are victims. Men are victims, and we're not talking about individuals. We're talking about the macroscopic group, and men are also the perpetrators. The whole talk is victim blaming.
And he also makes it, he does kind of a weird, like a reverse intersectionalism because he doesn't just make it about men. He makes it specifically about white straight men.
Yes,
because he says, when you say
through that,
when someone says the word race, you only think of black or brown or Asian people. When somebody says the word gender, you only think of women. And when somebody says the word, sexuality, you only think of gays and lesbians. And that's because white straight men are invisible because of their overwhelming power.
Yeah, he's like doing argumentation in the salesman fast talking version. He talks like a fast talking salesman, just breezing through these things, and from sort of non sequitur to straw man to mind reading to conclusion, and it's we see something very similar, although with a kind of a different flavor, I think, with the performative male or matcha male. This seems to be an Australian thing, but it's a lot more new agey. It's a lot more sort of Jungian in its color than the more businessy, sciencey, sociological flavor that we had back in the 20 teens. But it is essentially the same thing. And what is so funny about this is that I will bring up the Scotty K. I know it's not really good form to just gossip about these things, but certain individual examples are very illustrative of this, and it's hard to avoid those illustrative examples to make the point. There, another big story in the news on social media in the last couple months has been this Scotty K Fitness story, and I wish all the best to Scotty. I hope he sort of pulls himself out and sees the path that brought him to the place he's at now. What were the rules of if this is the place where the rules brought you, of what use were the rules kind of thinking. But there is when we talk about preventing sexual violence, there's always a very strong correlation between the people who are speaking out most strongly against it and the perpetrators of it. It is and this goes back to Sod's point, who makes this argument from a more evolutionary psychology perspective. It is always the sort of liberal feminist males who have this predatory motive behind performing in this way. And so when guys say like, oh, you're just doing this because it's threatening to you in some way, it's like, well, it is threatening, but not to me. I can see the threat that you are now posing to women. I see this. I can see it in you. You're not fooling me, even if you are fooling yourself, which I think is genuinely the case in many, many cases.
And a side point related to the term performative male, I think besides that Gen Z definition that you read out, I think people are also using it to talk about men that are doing a very dramatic, insincere performance of traditional masculine behavior.
That is definitely a part of it too. And this is where it gets very, like, the word magic gets very interesting, because there is a sense in which masculinity is performative, but there's a question of who are you performing this for? Who is your audience, and for what reason?
And the time and the circumstance.
Right. And so I think there is a disgust that many men feel when other men shape their notion of what masculinity is and ought to be based on what women, yes, on what women tell them it is too. Something feels weak. Like I see this complaint a lot by there was some poll number came out that showed like 10% of all women in the United States had at one point been on OnlyFans. I don't know if I believe that. But most of the comments are like, who are all the men that are supporting this? Who are all the men who are paying for this? And what kind of credit card jail can we put them in to make them stop paying for this? It is bad to encourage and enable that sort of behavior, right? And so I think when many men look at the performative male, they look at enabling behavior that is not just self-destructive, but socially destructive, and say, feeding into these delusions so you can get some is really bad. So like, yeah, who you're performing for. Ian says performance leads to an act, which is true. And there is an interesting line where performance and reality blend, and this gets into some very interesting philosophy about identity there too. But
it's complicated though, because the people that are putting down the men that are putting down their credit cards for that, what percentage of them aren't going to get some no matter what they do for whatever reason? And it's sort of like that oldest profession sort of joke. It's like, without that outlet, what might be the results to society?
That is true, and that's something that the really, really hardcore anti-porn advocates who I sympathize with, but I don't think they account for that. They see human nature as something that can be fixed or corrected, and it's like, this is like, you're probably going to do more harm than good. I understand the desire, but we have to be realistic about it. That said, the reality of human nature can't be an excuse to just permit or excuse all behavior. Like, humans have always killed each other.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean we shouldn't outlaw murder, right?
Exactly.
And in the same way, the enabling behavior that we see from these performative men can lead to some very dire consequences. And I think that's actually a very nice segue to get into the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu stuff, because you know what? We actually don't need to name names. We can just speak in general categories. There was a story, anyone can look it up. A very particular prominent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym, and one of the top people there got hit with allegations of sexual assault, misconduct, and stuff. And it's interesting because Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu has been presented over the last 10 to 15 years as a very empowering activity for women. Women can learn to defend themselves and do all this stuff. And the way we're going to teach them this is we're going to put them in close physical proximity, grappling with men in pajamas, basically. And I don't mind the derogatory language on BJJ. I would do it if there was a gym closer to me and if I had the money. But like, we're going to put them in this very intimate context. Presumably a lot of these people are married. You know, it is going to lead to, you know, feelings of intimacy following the physical intimacy. There was a really great Instagram post by a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt who was talking about this, who was talking about how, like, feelings follow physical actions. You're creating hormonal physical responses and cues that will lead to greater and greater feelings of intimacy. Is it any wonder, or is it any shock that some people act on those? And I have no doubt that some of these sexual allegations are true. I have even less doubt that many of the sexual assault allegations are really mutual acts of infidelity, but because someone's spouse or partner found out that something was askance, one or both sides says assault instead as a get out of jail free card. That happens a lot. Like it shows, I think, the BJJ scandal, and this has been brought up not just at this one gym, but many other people have come forward from other Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gyms saying, yeah, we've had problems here too. It shows just how far the erasure of the difference between the genders has been accepted even by people who are not nominally woke. You know, they, like, when you think about it from a sort of anthropological perspective, put men and women grappling together, of course that's going to lead to things. But many people seem to sort of tacitly have forgotten that. And I've experienced this myself in a couple, like, trial classes at BJJ that I've been to, and in a self-defense course. There was a couple instances where I grappled with a girl, a woman, at the BJJ trial class that almost ended up in a date. Like, it would have, except she had travel plans like immediately afterwards, you know. At the college self-defense class I was taking, this woman I was grappling with, like, the tension led to her trying to push things further to, like, get me to do things, and I had no game at the time. So, like, I had not a lot of interest in pursuing that, but, like, oh my gosh, like, the pressure was very strong. And this is not just me, you know, this is the context of Ian says jiu-jitsu classes lead to babies. Well, it certainly imitates some of the motions. Like, for the same reason that we have gender segregated bathrooms and we have gender segregated changing rooms, the fact that we don't have gender segregated combat classes is kind of astonishing when you think about it. Like, why do we not? Unless this is part of some, like, government plan to make a larger future generation. And, you know,
It
They've got
seems
other
to
things
me to
they
be
want
a
to do first.
very, I mean, I'm not very fond of the idea of co-ed anything. You know, dinner table, Scrabble, maybe. Um, you know that
Yeah.
making babies, whatever. You know, but I think that there's a lot of things where, and you know, really young children, fine, but then
Yeah.
in between, no, and adults, it just doesn't make sense. It
Well,
doesn't
and
make sense to be
maybe you can
even in
have
the sense of competition.
co-ed sports like soccer, frisbee, or whatever, but
Tennis,
like that should be understood
yeah.
to be a thing for singles. You know, that should be understood to be an activity for single people. Um, and it's considered, I think, kind of counter-progressive to think of it that way in the moment. But part of re-embracing the not just the differences between men and women, but the realities of men and women in relationship to each other, I think is something that would, if we are to follow Jackson Katz's injunction to think about like how are we going to avoid the system. It's like, well, Mr. Katz, your program is part of the problem here. You're empowering of women by bringing them into male spaces in like tense environments. It creates this, and it doesn't even need to be this intense physical grappling thing. It can just be, I don't know, CrossFit. You know, you know, um,
somebody
which
might argue, that, well, and this Katz would probably argue this, that you know it in the context of self-defense, a woman is most, you know, there's the 99% chance it's going to be a man that she's going to have to defend herself against. So it makes sense in that regard. But
maybe. I mean,
I
it
don't
it
know.
depends on what sort of relationship she's in. There are domestic violence data on this, but a digression for another time. But like it is good for everybody to have some self defense skills. I have these. I have one on me. I don't think. I'm a huge proponent of women having like knives or spikes or ideally a gun. Guns are
Yeah,
great. You know,
yeah.
sure, pepper spray. Why not?
Pepper
You know,
spray.
it's always good to have those things. And is it good to learn these martial arts stuff? Yes, and not just for self defense. It's just fun and it's good physical activity and all this stuff. Um, and you know, maybe for again singles, for people who are singles, co-ed things could be a great place to meet people. I've said, you know, to my single friends, if you want to meet someone, like go to a rock climbing gym or a bouldering gym. It's a great place, you know, these kinds of physical activities to meet people. But where you have this kind of, I mean, Brazilian jiu-jitsu is controlled assault, right? So to say, oh, we're gonna put men and women together and have them assault each other, and then like, oh my gosh, sexual assault, how could this have happened? It betrays a kind of an almost it would be insulting to children to call it childish, because even children understand the difference between men and women at a very basic level. But like a blank slatish misunderstanding of male and female nature, which I think is also co- true in a different way with the performative male, but it expresses itself in a very similar way, which is like a pretense of not understanding male and female nature, or having overcome it, I've spiritually transcended, I've gotten in touch with my inner feminine or whatever, in a performance that is predatory. Dr. Gadsad, who I mentioned before, calls it the sneaky fucker strategy, because it exists not just in humans but in other primates, where there'll be kind of like more powerful males who procreate the normal way, but then there are lower status males who will create distractions and will try to mate secretly, kind of on the side, with women while the males are distracted. And there's something similar going on with the performative male in their approach. Gadsad's interview with Joe Rogan is fantastic in explaining this, if you haven't seen it, or for anyone listening here who hasn't seen it. But it expands the approach beyond just the human level to something that is so we're not getting away from this dynamic, I don't think, but that doesn't make it any less valuable, I think, for people to be aware of it. We will always have male feminists or performative males or whatever they'll be called in 2050, but it's always good to be able to understand what that is and why it's happening. Ian says segregation is a good thing. Sometimes it is good to put up some boundaries. Reference Curtis Yarvin on gatekeeping. Yes. The Yarvin point about gatekeeping is about maintaining quality, and there's a little bit of that too. This is actually something Agnator wrote about many years ago, about like part of the reason to bring women into a lot of these more male spaces is actually financial. Like, if you increase your customer base, you make more money as a coach. There are incentives besides money. A lot of coaches lead to a lot of infidelity by trained women, but that incentive to increase your client base does lead not just to, gender problems, but leads to quality problems in general. One could argue this is what happened with schools too, in universities. There's a financial incentive to bring in more students so we can get more tuition money. So we're going to change our standards but maintain the appearance of high standards by adding a bunch of exceptions and like culture maintenance justifications for bringing in different types of students. And suddenly the standards are basically a fictitious illusion that justifies the appearance of the quality of the product on the end, which is the degree, but it's no longer there. The quality has dropped off because the quality of the entrance has dropped off.
And it just, with jiu-jitsu, it just doesn't seem to make sense to me. I mean, obviously a lot of it is about technique and skill, and women are, of course, capable of technique and skill, but it's also about certain, physical, they match people up based on similarities in physical size. But, across the board, the disparity between men and women when it comes to strength, even when appearing physically similar in size, is really huge.
It is.
You see this in day-to-day life. It's like, and people will deny it. I've gotten in some arguments with people where like that's not true. There's absolutely no difference. And it's like, okay, well, let me just open the fucking 1,000th pickle jar. Like, how many jars do I have to open for this to be like seen as real?
Yeah. And it's tricky with jiu-jitsu because I remember I did get to roll with an actual black belt at one of the trial classes. And I made the mistake of telling the black belt before we started rolling, because I had just been rolling with a blue belt. And I got baseball choked. And I made the mistake of telling the black belt, I'm like, all right, I'm my one goal is to try to not get baseball choked. And he gave this kind of like sly smile. And I realized I had screwed up probably after about my fourth baseball choke after that. And that was not the last one. And the thing was, I was much stronger than this. I had about 3 inches and probably 30 pounds on this black belt. I was significantly bigger than him and stronger than him and more athletic than him in general. And I had no chance at all. And I'm sure that if I were to roll with a woman who was 5'2" and 110 pounds soaking wet, but who happened to be a brown belt, I would probably get wrecked, because the skill does make a huge difference.
It's knowing the moves.
But like, provided we're not striking, right? Like, because striking matters a lot. We've all seen the horrific, trans boxing matches. Just like, it's just a dude beating the shit out of a woman. That's that's all that is. And it frankly kind of sucks to watch. But it's like South Park was right again. But there is a place for training across skill levels, and it's not like there's something inherently wrong with a mismatch or size or reach or weight. Sure. Whether it's in a striking art like karate, which is what I came up doing. I was like 5'1", 5'2" through most of early high school. And so I'm sparring against people who have like 6 to 8 inches on me. And it's like, oh, God, how am I going to reach them? I got really good at kicking because that was the only way I could reach, and then late high school, I shot up to 5'11", and I'm like, okay, now I can strike normally. But you have to think, like, how am I going to reach this person? I was just chatting with a gentleman before we got on the call, who's Army Ranger, big into BJJ, and he was talking about rolling with high school kids. Some of whom were really good and could control their strength. Others were really good and could not control their strength and would like hurt people. And so eventually he rolled with the wrong guy and got hurt himself. And it's like, you have to learn these things. You have to learn control. You have to learn how to be taught and how to teach. And a lot of that is working with people of a different size than you and a different skill level than you. In the BJJ world, white belts are the scariest opponents because they can't control themselves as well.
And that's something that men do amongst other men. It's a very traditional, and it doesn't matter what it is. It could be fishing, it could be, so many different activities, and it's like a really important way that men improve themselves and check themselves, etc. And it making that co-ed changes the whole entire thing, because there are behaviors that men perform around each other, ways that they talk, ways that they interact that are not appropriate, that you're not going to do around women. There's things,
right,
that, and they're important things. And the co-edness, is that a word? The co-edness,
it changes the dynamic.
It changes the dynamic, and it dampens things.
Yeah, it suddenly, we're now no longer competing with each other as men among men, but there's now an element of competing for a woman, potentially, even if at a very, very subconscious level. And that is, it changes the dynamic. Ian says in the comments, guys have complained as soon as women enter their space, the quality of the discussions and direction tanks, and then the performative males come out. That's true. There's also been military trials on this, where they'll do all male teams, all female teams, and mixed teams, and in various exercises, and consistently the all male teams outcompete both the all female teams and the mixed teams. And the difference is much greater between the male team, the all male team, and the other two than it is between the all female team and the mixed team. The mixed team is like basically the same as the all female team, because there's a dynamic shift that can be difficult to articulate exactly, because it's not like, the shift is not a rational part of our brain. It's one of these like hindbrain parts, or like some prey drive cues are kicking in that make you want to compete in a little different way, and draw out slightly different behaviors, for reasons that predate reason itself. Like this is animal instinct kicking over. Just as if you're like grappling with a woman, that draws out these same kind of like prey drive instincts. And it's the guys who deny that and who pretend that they alone are immune to this, those are the ones that you have to look out for the most, because they're denying and pretending that they don't have a core and essential part of our psychology that we've almost moralized away. Mm-hmm. And the thing is, there's nothing immoral about it. There's nothing immoral at all about it. In fact, there's probably something unhealthy about not having it. Like, you might have to get your testosterone level checked. But there's definitely a time and a place for it. And it's not something you want to be invoking or having drawn out of you in public with strangers or with other people if you're married or if the other person is married, And that's I think where we've set our aspirational blank slate ideals of society against the biological reality that we actually come pre-programmed with. And we're to borrow from the words of the late and great Hitchens, we are essentially born sick, created sick, and commanded to be well, on pain of immorality, barbarism, and so forth.
And I think and the men that are sort of all in on that whole, the whole description of that Gen Z description of performative males, there is something really off when they end up in a group of all men in some situation, and they keep playing that. And that I've experienced that. It's not like, I'm not Thor or whatever, like when it comes to manliness, but I've been in situations and it's like there's that one dude and it's like you feel the same discomfort and sort of like self-editing, like you're in a room full of ladies. And you're like, oh shit, I can't say that. Oh, I got to watch my language.
It's because, like the Don Quixote white knight. He's white knighting for windmills that aren't even in the room with us. Like, why are you doing this?
There's all the constant like attempt to drill into people's brains the idea of equality, but then it is clearly on the surface also that men are expected to act a certain way, speak a certain way, and even think a certain way when they are in the company of women, so that they don't offend them.
Yeah.
As though the implication is that men are nothing more than defective women.
Right. And not only are we defective women, we're defective women with this extra ability that is our masculinity that carries an obligation to stand up for women. And I think that was the most pernicious thing of Jackson Katz's presentation, and this is true of the performative males of today too, is this invoked obligation to stand up for women and champion women. And this is why I think it's important to be careful in like jumping on bandwagons of condemnation, even of someone like Scotty or the latest BJJ characters or whomever, because the supposed obligation to stand up for women and to defend women or any other victim class is like a moralized injunction to intervene in situations you don't understand based upon ideological ideas of how we ought to be that are not organically grown from experience of the reality of how we actually are. Clip that. Let me try to use that tool for a change. Remember that. And I think this is what we see with the people who are jumping in to condemn like these sexual assault allegations. On the one hand, I totally understand. It looks bad and it sort of taints the whole community, and we don't want to be associated with moral taint, with moral pollution. of this variety. However, the moral standard that thing is failing is built upon a blank slate ideal that doesn't take human nature into account. It is very, very likely, to the point of probable, that what is now being called sexual assault was in fact something mutual. That because someone felt shame, maybe there was cheating involved, later got interpreted as and called assault retrospectively. That would be a very normal thing to do. You know, it's not a good thing, but it's a very normal thing given the context that we have allowed and created with co-ed grappling, and that we've allowed these performative males to create at a cultural level in general. I feel like the millennial. Sorry, go ahead.
And of course, it's also part of human nature, male nature, to in a natural and good way to want to protect or defend somebody in danger or who is weaker. But that's not just going to be everybody, because that person has to be capable, understand that they're capable, and be sort of, self-actualized, which is why in many cases there isn't anything a guy can do to defend some, right in front of him, or they're going to run. And it's because it's also, human nature to be afraid or to turn away from something frightening,
And it's good to have that instinct, though. It is good to have both the competence to defend someone and the courage to do it. And we do have that protective instinct, not just of women, but other men too. And
people perform that as well. There's plenty of like dumpy dudes eating donuts in the basement posting online about protecting.
That's true. There's a performative quality, and there's also, whenever we have a strong instinct to do something, that is an inroad for manipulation. And we see this with politics too. Our desire to protect children makes it very easy for politicians and lawmakers and activists to frame any damn thing as protecting the children. Climate change is about protecting the children. Changing how transportation systems is about protecting the children. Anti-gun legislation is about protecting the children. Anything we want can be framed as protecting the children or women or minorities, or like our desire to protect people, which is good and should be preserved, nonetheless is a weakness that we have to be mindful of mentally. There's that great line from the Mark Wahlberg movie Shooter, where he's been set up to be a patsy and a fall guy for an assassination. A sniper hit that's made to look like an attack on the president, but it really kills someone else. And the way they get him into this position where they can make him the patsy is they appeal to his patriotism. They have him, they're like, we need your expertise. How would you set up this shot and everything? And they bring him to the scene and everything. And later, as he's escaped, he'd been injured, and he's connected with this woman. Guess where that goes? And he says, they got me with my patriotism. He says, I ain't proud of it, ain't ashamed of it either. And I love that line, because the idea of like, you're not proud of it, but you're not ashamed of it, describes so many healthy natural instincts. Our sex drive itself. Like, you should not be ashamed of having that, but it is a very powerful tool of manipulation, and you don't be ashamed of it, but you should not be proud of how easily that instinct can turn into a leash, and that you can be led around by in a really shameful manner. So, and the protective instinct is exactly the same. So just like, this is where the Plato's calculating part of the soul becomes very important. So you don't let your thumos run away with you, or your appetites run away with you. as the case may be, depending on who you're grappling with.
Hold the reins.
Yes, hold those reins, both of them tight, and and feed them a healthy amount. You should give your appetites and your spirit satiation, and that's one of the great things about martial arts and Brazilian jiu-jitsu. It does give you, martial arts in general, and competition in general, physical competition. It gives you an outlet for that competitive thing, and it's one of the tragic things where we keep bringing women into these male competitive spaces that changes the dynamic, and now we're actually robbed of that space that was set aside to satiate this need we have for intra-male competition that is so healthy and good on its own.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a shame in a few different ways. But
then the next thing you know, you're going to one of those events where people drink wine and paint.
Yes, which I mean,
and everything
might be fun
ruined.
for a different reason, but yeah.
No.
Speaking of fun things, Ian says speed dating and single mixer should be replaced with jiu-jitsu classes. That would work. If I was single and there was co-ed jiu-jitsu, I would sign up for that.
How to prevent male-to-male intimacy in combat?
That sounds like another Platonic question.
Intimacy doesn't just mean sex. And it's one of those words that kind of like, we can't really just freely use because it's associated primarily with, hugs and kisses or whatever.
It's actually not a Plato question, it's a Joker question, right? Is you want me to tell you which ones were cowards? Yeah. That's an intimate thing. But yeah, I don't think that's what Ian's talking about. He's talking about the other kind. Yeah, that's just so there's a risk of injury with all these things, and there's other risks that come too. So just bear that in mind, I guess. Or play soccer like I did. I don't know. Do boxing. Boxing's great. I should do boxing.
That's on my agenda for the summer.
One of my favorite forms of internet porn is the videos of the jacked young guy who ends up squaring off with some like very clearly experienced but older boxing instructor, and the physical difference could not be more stark. Like the young jacked guy is like clearly like more athletic, but because the older guy has that, like boxing is not just a technical art, there's also like a chess like strategy to it, and the old guy just destroys the younger guy like every time. Not every time, but like a good boxing coach who often does not look physically athletic at all, can just trounce athletic novices in ways that are kind of shocking, and it's very impressive to watch.
And it's obviously that's about a lifetime of skill, but
sure.
And people say old man strength, which is a thing, but also another thing that plays into it is a lifetime of experience, in the sense that you figured out that you're not going to die from most things.
Yeah.
And so there's a sort of a boldness.
Not to make this all about the classics, but I always think of it in relation to Achilles and Odysseus. Like the epithet of Achilles is swift-footed Achilles.
Yeah.
He's so fast, presumably. He wins races. He wins the chariot races. The apobatic chariot, which is actually you jump off your chariot and you finish on foot, which is crazy. But Odysseus is the exact opposite. He's a man of endurance. And when he's on the island of the Phaeacians and they're challenging him to athletic events, and he eventually just wrecks them all with the discus. But he says that he can take them all in any event except running. He can't beat them in speed. Sprinting, his legs aren't what they once were, and maybe he was never that fast. But I feel like that's all like old man experience. Like I've worked with foremen and journeymen in the trades who are like, you watch them work and they're like, they don't look like they're moving very fast at all. But you leave them alone for 4 hours and you come back and they've done like 6 hours of work and you're like, geez. And it's just that experience and knowledge and knowing how to do things efficiently and well that makes them just so effective. And they have that strength of endurance, like you said, that they know it's not going to kill them, so they can push a little bit harder. Whereas young men have this speed and explosiveness, but they get disheartened and they kind of fade away a lot faster. I think I've hunted for this video for so many years that I've never been able to find it again. But my favorite fight I ever saw was between my favorite form of karate. I did Shudokan karate for 6 years, which is great. But my favorite form of karate is called Goju. There's different schools of karate, and Goju, which translates to hard soft, because the founder didn't feel like it needed a name until he was asked what it was called. It's very focused on breathing. There's a lot of like kind of like very intense breath work involved that is about tensing and then relaxing your body for the strikes and everything. And this can, when you breathe in this manner, it can make you almost like impervious to strikes in some way. And like one of the masters of this was actually not a karate guy at all. It was Harry Houdini, who was famous for being able to like get hit by all kinds of strong men in the stomach and be able to take anything. And there was this fight between a Goju karate guy who must have been in his mid 40s, maybe older than that, versus a young Korean guy who must have been early 20s, maybe even late teens, early 20s most likely. And the Korean kid, clearly Taekwondo trained, moving around all fast and everything. And this fight lasted 8 minutes. And the Goju guy's just moving around the ring like this, just coming in. And he takes about 3 kicks for every 1 punch he lands. But at no point does the Goju Japanese guy's posture or movement change at all. His face is getting bloodied up. He's getting bruises, but he's not changing how he moves at all. And you can see the Korean guy getting more and more worn down and tired until the last, right around the 8-minute mark, he throws this very lame front kick. And the Goju guy just sweeps it out, liver punch, drops him. And that was the end. And it was like that endurance is so like classical old man athleticism. I imagine that's true in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu as well.
It's like a tough resistance.
Yes. Yeah. It's
like a bull.
Yes. Yeah. Ian says the best fight scenes come from Kung Fu Hustle and Shaolin Soccer. You know what's embarrassing? I have actually not seen Shaolin Soccer. Kung Fu Hustle is amazing. It's an extraordinary film. If you haven't seen it, you owe it to yourself to see it. It's a very fun one. Axe Gang. Anyways, that seems like a pretty good coverage for a day. Do you want to call it early, or do you have a few final thoughts on old man retard strength as my army?
I am an old retarded man that is fairly strong.
Yeah. You're very, very impressive. I aspire to age like you when I get up there. It's coming.
I'm doing the opposite of aging.
That's the way to do it. It's the way to do it. And I remember being in my 20s and I'd see guys who are like in their 40s or 50s, but I used to look like you. It's all downhill after 30. And I always resented that. I was like, no, you didn't. And no, it won't. And yeah. I am now much stronger than I was in my 20s.
Yeah, I'm going to be 56, right, in May, and I never say that kind of shit to anybody younger. That like, oh well, like, I mean, I'll joke around with you guys in private about whatever sore ankles or something, but like anybody younger, you know, I'm always like, you have no idea how much more awesome everything about you is going to be in 30 years, you know?
Yeah. No, I do feel like there's a sense in which the prime, I really do feel like the male prime is in the like mid 30s to early 40s, but the reality is it's like, it's kind of whatever you make it to be. Your prime can be, I mean, there's obviously biological limits, you know,
Yeah.
you're never going to be as fast of a sprinter as you were in your late teens. It's just not going to happen. But like a lot of your strength is yet to come from your teens to your like 30s and 40s. And I think it's also true intellectually. I think you're at your cognitively quickest and sharpest in your mid 20s.
Probably.
If you take an IQ test, I strongly doubt that people's IQ tests go up after like 25. It's probably down. A lot of people's best intellectual work is in their 20s, which is kind of a depressing thing to think about. But as with the physical domain, you know, maybe you're not the sprinter of Achilles, you know, that you were in your youth, but there is a kind of intellectual old man endurance that you can develop that is actually much more formidable and much more powerful that you can develop, and you can do tremendous things intellectually, even without the G score, without the speed that you maybe had as a youth. And I think people lose sight of that and they get very disheartened needlessly over that kind of thing.
The picture becomes more holistic. Like the man that you are becomes more complete because there's things that you're going to be better at certain times of your life, things that, you know, and they're going to be more of a focus perhaps. But, you know, if you do things correctly or whatever the word is, you know, it becomes a more complete picture, you know.
Yes.
And you don't, you know, I don't want to leave this world like, well, at least he, you know, oh, well, at least he was, you know, still smart about certain things. No, I want, you know, it may be less potential in certain areas, but I would rather have a rounded, you know, to be remembered as a complete man.
Yes, absolutely. To be strong, but also accomplished in other ways. Perhaps you write a cookbook or something.
Yeah, and forget remembered. I did. Yeah, we already had, that was one of our first shows together. Forget remembered. I want to live as a more, you know, as a complete man.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, by the standards and performing for the people who you care about, which should ideally begin with yourself. That seems like a good spot to end it. It was you know, it's interesting stuff, but it's a lot of stuff that was talked about with different language back in the 20 teens. It's always good to go back, you know, and remind people of that as these sort of new stories come out and people forget the language for it. So yeah, fun stuff. Well, thanks everyone for tuning in. And yeah, this has been Solar Sunday. We'll see you next Sunday.
Yeah.
Stay solar.
Stay solar.
Thank you for watching or listening to the Journal of Solar Culture. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and leave us a comment. The first volume of our journal is available in paperback and now, finally, on Kindle. Pick it up in our store or on Amazon.